In the Senate, Senate Bill 1292 by Judiciary and Rules Committee, an act relating to motorcycles, to provide that law enforcement shall not engage in motorcycle profiling.
Mr. President.
Senator Guthrie.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that further reading of Senate Bill 1292 be dispensed with. The journal show had been read for a third time at length, section by section, and now placed before the Senate for final consideration.
Without objection, is so ordered. Senator Guthrie is recognized to open debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, one of the things I love about Boise is the weather. And while it will soon be motorcycle riding time down where I live, I don't know if I've ever seen a month up here where I didn't see people riding motorcycles up here. Of course, they're a little tougher maybe, but the weather is so much nicer up here, but I'm excited to get out on my Harley when the weather is appropriate. Mr. President, Senators, I'm here to present Senate Bill 1292, and it does deal with motorcycle profiling. It's a very simple bill in terms of content, but we believe a very significant piece of legislation for those who ride and who have worked so hard to bring awareness to motorcycle profiling and to mitigate concerns and promote this legislation in a positive way. Probably without exception, and because this is, I believe, the third attempt, we have all seen an iteration of this legislation before. So I believe it would be a disservice of your time in carrying on at length, so I'll be brief. It's an easy read and does three things. It defines motorcycle profiling, makes motorcycle profiling illegal, and it makes it clear that the legislation does not create a cause of action against any individual, division of government, or law enforcement entity. And that's an important part. And as you look at Section 3, it represents what is different from previous unsuccessful bills. I believe last year by a single vote was defeated, and was added to alleviate some concerns, not just of law enforcement, but also members of the legislature. On your desk, you'll find three sheets. And Senators, I believe it's important that I strike a balance between showing that motorcycle profiling exists. Otherwise, we wouldn't need the bill before you. And so you will see that on one sheet, which shows a graph that was a national survey that was, it is an Idaho specific, taken in Idaho. And it shows that 87% of those who ride believes that motorcycle profiling is an issue. The other two shows positive things that those who ride do in their communities. On one, you'll see a list that by all means is not all-inclusive of all the good things they do, showing 210,000 raised just in 2019. And the other one is specific to the Minnecashi area, which shows pictures and shows some data on all the good things that they're doing in individual communities as well. And I know in my community they're heavily engaged in POW, MIA issues, veterans issues, and they're just engaged in the community in so many positive ways. Senators, this legislation is about improving the relationship between law enforcement and those who ride. It's meant to further educate and to improve those relationships. I'd like to close with a story. A few years ago, I was headed over to Bear Lake there in southeast Idaho, beautiful lake, a beautiful area. And I was on my motorcycle and I was riding down the road along the lake, and it's kind of a windy road and a two-lane road and kind of a busy road. And I overshot where I was supposed to turn into some friends because I hadn't been there before, and so I was turning around on my motorcycle, and there was a little gravel that was up on the edge, and I hit that just enough that it skidded me off the road. And the terrain dropped off precipitously, and it was a very steep incline, and so there I am with my bike off the side of the road and kind of leaned over, and I'm kind of in a mess. And hadn't hurt the bike, hadn't hurt anything, hadn't hurt myself, other than maybe the ego thing a little bit. Well, a guy stopped in his pickup and had his girlfriend with him, and this guy come over and he's packing guns, and I don't mean the concealed weapons kind, I mean this guy was ripped. And thank goodness he was. And so he comes over, and between the three of us, we got my bike up and got it back on the road, which I never would have been able to do alone. And I thanked him, and he says, you know, I would do that for any motorist, anybody. He says, we ride too, and we look out for those that do as well. These are some of the best people that ride on the road and use our roadways and do so much good in the community. Be glad to answer questions. Mr. President, the debate is open.
Debate being opened. Is there further debate? Senator Vick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have not voted for these in the past, and I appreciate the corrections or the improvements to the bill that the good senator has made. I have talked to the local motorcycle community up in North Idaho, and I don't know how many of you know this, but North Idaho is kind of mecca for retired law enforcement. We have a lot of California law enforcement retired to North Idaho. And one of the things that the motorcycle group up there told me is we don't have to deal with profiling because so many retired law enforcement ride here that local law enforcement is afraid to profile anybody up here. But I know that's not the case everywhere. I've heard the stories and I've seen the examples, and I think the clarification for how this helps law enforcement is important, and so I will be supporting the bill.
Is there further debate? Senator Bayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Profiling is already illegal. It's in statute, and law enforcement is prohibited from profiling. I have an email from the Lieutenant Colonel Sheldon Kelly of ISP. May I read from that, sir?
Having identified the source, the senator may read.
Thank you. He goes to say, ISP has not taken a formal position on this bill, but I can relay to you, law enforcement already has to have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop any vehicle. This bill will not alter those requirements. Law enforcement already cannot stop a motorcycle without a suspected violation, and anyone who thinks they are stopped or cited simply because they ride a motorcycle can address those issues in court and/or with the officer's department. I will oppose this bill because once again, we are taking a class and giving it special privileges. I stood up the other day on a bill we had that was doing that same thing. It was adding another category of individuals to a list, a special segregated list that gives them special privileges. And at other times we talk about equality. There seems to be a conflict here. We have another bill that is going to be coming to us from across the rotunda shortly that gives special privileges to certain people. And I think we need to stop that. We have motorcycles today, we might have red convertibles tomorrow, and we might have old pickups another day. Some of my best friends ride motorcycles, and I have stood in the snow for hours watching hundreds and hundreds of motorcycles go by with toys for tots on their back, the good that they do, and I greatly appreciate that. But I don't think that we need to continue making lists of groups of people and setting them apart from others. I will be voting no, and I cannot support this. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Senator Groh.
Mr. President, I was one of the no votes last year, and my good friend that brought it last year was disappointed in me, but I had a concern, and the concern was the possible cause of action against law enforcement that this might give to motorcycle riders. And I feel that section number 3 here has addressed that concern that I'll restate it. Nothing in this section shall be construed to create a cause of action against any individual, the state of Idaho, any counties or cities of the state, or any law enforcement entity within the state. I'm not sure it does much good, but at least this avoids the harm that I was concerned about it. So I will be voting in favor of this. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd be remiss if I didn't stand up and debate on this because of the impact it potentially could have on what law enforcement may think we think about them. And I just want to assure my friends in law enforcement that this is about a bill about the outliers. It's not about the general population, the general makeup of law enforcement. This is about outliers. And so when you think about that, I think we can show our support for our FOP and for our sheriffs and our Idaho State Police. But there are times when you do need to take care of outliers. and this would be one way to do it and give them some direction, try and eliminate any problems. So thank you.
Is there further debate? Senator Hyder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would be remiss if I didn't stand and voice my support for motorcyclists. I love to ride my motorcycle. Yes, I've gotten one ticket since I've been in the Senate, and that was on my motorcycle. But it wasn't because they were profiling, it was because I was speeding, and I freely admit that. I love the freedom of riding my motorcycle, and I love riding with other people, other groups. Every year we have a big motorcycle rally, veterans in Twin Falls, and we have a police officer on motorcycle in the front and a police officer in the back. And they're very, very supportive of the motorcyclists in Twin Falls on that particular day. But we're supporting veterans and we're supporting police officers. And I think generally speaking, motorcycle riders are just like all the rest of us. I know I am. And I don't think I'm different when I'm dressed in my leathers and on my motorcycle or when I'm driving in my car. So I think it's very important that we don't profile anyone. And even though this specifies motorcyclists, I believe police officers do not profile. And so I don't see any harm in this. In fact, I think it's a good thing. So I'll be voting in favor. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, Senator Guthrie is recognized. Close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the senators from 2, 21, and 24, and 13, 14. Appreciate your debate and comments. Just a little response to the senator from 21. In section, I think it's 42 U.S. Code section 1983 is where protected classes are protected from discrimination, and motorcycle riders are not a protected class, and there's the delineation there. The other thing I would note, and if I could, I may at times paraphrase and I may at times read from the legislative packet given to, I think, all the legislators this year from Abate of Idaho, Mr. President.
Senator may paraphrase or read.
Thank you, Mr. President. It says that codifying legal practices by statute, particularly retaining civil liberties, is very common, especially when judicial precedence is being circumvented. That's just one thought. Another one is codification brings greater certainty of law in the legal system. That's exactly why the Idaho legislature codified the Castle Doctrine in 2018. It's just another opportunity to put into action what we want the law to look like. And finally, a couple of comments from the role of courts and legislators in civil and common law system. They argued, the system of law must be created and developed by the interaction between legislature and the judiciary. It must exist both in statute law and of court-made law. A case law system would become an odd curiosity shop if it was not constantly reinvigorated by statute. Senators, there are 8.4 million registered motorcyclists in America, and 66,000 of them live in Idaho. I just close with this. This has been promoted as a very positive thing, and I could have put out a lot of pictures that maybe cast it differently, but that's not the intent of the group bringing this, and it's not my intent in my debate. I want this to be something positive, something educational, and I think it's about further education of law enforcement towards those who ride, and conversely, to educate those who ride about the role of law enforcement. I think it can be a collaborative effort and an educational effort. They've certainly worked hard on this. They think it's important. I do as well. Appreciate your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. President. Debate's closed.
Debate being closed, the question is, shall Senate Bill 1292 pass the Senate? The Secretary will call the roll.
Eigenbrod, Anthon, Baer, Bayer, Brackett, Buckner-Webb, Burgoyne, Burtonshaw, Cheatham, Crabtree, Den Hartog, Grow, Guthrie, Harris, Hyder, Hill,
Nay.
Johnson, Jordan, Blakey, Lee, Lent, Lodge, Martin? Mortimer? Nelson? Nye? Patrick? Rice? Souza? Stennett? Thane? Vic? Board King? Winder? Woodward? Anthon? Lent?
Roll call shows 25 ayes, 9 nays, 1 absent or excused. The majority having voted in the affirmative, Senate Bill 1292 has passed the Senate. Is there a correction to the title? Hearing none, title is approved, and Senate Bill 1292 will be transmitted to the House. The Senate now has before it for final consideration Senate Bill 1340. Secretary will read the bill.